developing studies of genetics of lupus in mice long before the human or the mouse genome project had created the kind of tools that one would need in order to look at this in any sort of a detailed way. I first crossed paths with Fred in a serious way back in the early 1980s when, of all things, Fred gave a lecture at the Houston VA Hospital. I was a resident in Houston at the time, on St. Patrick's Day. So Fred, being the closet Irishman that he was, in fact, was invited to give this St. Patrick's Day talk. And I was just so impressed with what Fred had created at the NIH in terms of this combined clinical and laboratory program that I thought that was really where I wanted to do my rheumatology fellowship. And it was because of that St. Patrick's Day lecture that Fred Steinberg gave that I'm here at the NIH today. So I applied for a fellowship in Fred's lab. I came and interviewed with Fred. As soon as I told Fred that in fact I was committed to come to work with him, he then went out of the office, and Betty Rouquet, some of you may remember Betty, came up to me and she said, "Well, now you're stuck. Now you'll see the real situation in Fred's lab." So in any case, I came despite Betty's sort of ominous comments, and it was really incredible. And I think those here who were in Fred's lab over the years would say that it was one of the most remarkable experiences of one's scientific life. And I say that because Fred was someone who gave us a lot of freedom in the lab to do what we wanted to do, what we were interested in doing, to follow our passions. And lab meetings in Fred's lab were always very lively, a lot of times with pyrotechnics and histrionics. It was really quite a thing to experience a lab meeting with Fred. So that was always an experience, and really something that was very formative, I think, for all of us in terms of learning how to really decide what it was that was important to us and argue for it, and stand our ground. I can remember the first time that I told Fred that I wanted to work on familial Mediterranean fever, and he said to me that was the most idiotic thing that he had ever heard in his life. And it took some discussion over the course of time, before he finally bought into it. But then, once he did, he was an incredible supporter of that, and that's the way it was with Fred. That you really had to prove yourself to him. As a physician, he was incredible. Although Fred encouraged us all to spend time in the lab doing our projects in the lab to build our scientific careers. In fact, Fred was a clinician without equal. And certainly I saw times when we were caring for patients that were extremely sick. A patient that comes to my mind, the late Susan Greenwald, who at the age of 16 had transverse myelitis associated with her lupus and infarcted her colon and had a colectomy. And Fred was really one of the most empathic and kind and supportive people with regard to patients who were really, really sick. And I always will remember him for that, for just the wonderful qualities he had as a clinician. As a person, Fred was also someone that was without equal. He was just absolutely remarkable. On the face of it, there were these things, Fred's idiosyncrasies that you couldn't, miss So Fred was the guy that almost always was wearing sneakers. He was the guy that had a book in his, put in behind his belt and back because he wanted to, improve his posture or whatever, and so he always had his book there. If you went to a Chinese restaurant, he would get, he'd take the fortune, he'd always, pay attention to what his fortune was, but then he put it in his wallet, and, at times, he would pull out his wallet and he'd have notes on, something that he wanted you to work on or thought that would be really interesting to you, but all of these fortunes would also fall out of his wallet, at the same time. These were some of the milder things. Some of the more interesting things. So Fred was an artist, and some of you may have seen some of Fred's artwork. So at least there were stages of Fred's artistic career. And I don't know if this was the first stage, but an early stage of Fred's artistic career involved the representation of women's breasts, in various ways. And you would, it's amazing, macrophages would take on the appearance of women's breasts and so forth. And the thing that was amazing was that Fred would give us these paintings. I mean, Fred was prolific. And these were on canvas, oil paintings. And he would give us these paintings. And we would have parties, lab parties, either at Fred's house or at, like our houses. And so, he'd give you one of these paintings, and you'd take it home, and what I would do anyway is that I would put it in the closet. But then if Fred happened to come over for something, or pick up a manuscript or something, you'd have to quickly, go in the closet, get out the painting, put it on the wall, where you get some other painting. So this was early Fred painting. So then we had a Halloween party at our house one time, and he saw these geese. We had a painting of geese by Benjamin Chichi. And Fred really liked this painting, and so, this led to the goose phase of Fred's painting. And so everyone got geese for a while. And then landscapes. And actually, I have a very soothing landscape still hanging on the wall of my office. I was looking at it last night, as a matter of fact, as I was thinking about Fred. So there were those things with regard to Fred. Fred was also actually a world champion, or at least U.S. champion bridge player. And at the memorial service for Fred, there were those who were, we knew about it in the lab. Fred would say that he was going to go and play in a bridge tournament. And he won national championships in bridge. And we heard at the memorial service that, in fact, I didn't know this, but it does not for 1 second surprise me, that Fred was one of these people that in playing cards, he could figure out what the hand was that every single person, that was playing cards with him had, and had it all memorized, and could, totally reproduce, what were all of the plays, with regard to the card game. So he was incredibly smart and also very interested in many, many other things. Going to his house, those of us who were in his lab certainly saw that he was a wonderful father and family man as well. Those of us that were in Fred's lab, at least at the time that I was there, got to know his wife Susan and his kids, Kathleen and Bonnie and Ellen and Robert, and he was really a wonderful father to them. So, there were these many dimensions with regard to Fred. Fred retired from the NIH, I think it was in 1991, and then there was the new phase of Fred's life. And I must say that, I'm extremely proud that I had a role in the latter phase of Fred's life. So what happened is that Fred retired, and I was a tenure-track investigator, and I had been exiled from Building 10 to Building 6. And I got this call from a headhunter one day who wanted to know if I was interested in going to work at a think tank. And I said, well, no, I'm a tenure track investigator at NIAMS. I wouldn't possibly want to go and work at a think tank. But I know just the person who might be interested in working at a think tank. And so I gave them Fred's name, and the think tank was the MITRE Corporation. And you know, I just mentioned to Fred that I thought that, you know, maybe he'd want to have, you know, another life or whatever, you know, and that he'd want to go and work at a think tank. So, you know, he talked with them and they talked with him, and, you know, he ended up going to this think tank. So that was the most incredible thing ever. And one time, Fred actually invited me to go to give a talk at this think tank. And so this was actually in 2001 that Fred invited me to give a talk at the think tank. I will dance to that.
Sorry, Dan, sorry.
At the think tank. So this was like in September of 2001, and Fred was organizing this thing for the intelligence community of the United States. You know, so that it was like for CIA and FBI and the Defense Intelligence Agency and so forth. And what we were supposed to do, I was supposed to cover the possible threats to the United States security that might be the result of the Human Genome Project. And then there was someone else that was going to cover microbial genetics, and somebody else that was going to cover, you know, plant genetics and so forth. And it was really an incredible meeting. And he had us come to this room. It's the only time I have ever lectured at a podium where there was actually a